Welcome to Back to the City. Today I'm very excited to be joined by BRIANNA, KOCKA, and we're going to be diving into Let It Stay, which is the beautiful new EP, which you just released. In terms of the instrumentation on this record, we have accordion, piano, organ, woodwinds, bass. You're playing the Rhodes and synthesizers, and the backing vocals are very significant too. Could you begin by reflecting a little bit on the significance of the sonic palette that we have?
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for asking those questions. The stripped back versions of the songs felt very different, I guess you could say. There's a bit of a harkening back to the Dream Life album on some of the songs, but then there's also just this other kind of folk songwriter thing happening. And I wanted to really just fill the space with like some expansive, lush sounds. But there was no real grand plan. I kind of did it. When we were recording it, we were multi-tracking it. So we recorded the guitar and the vocals first to a click track. And then the first person that got copies to work off of was Lars, my drummer. And he kind of just started demoing parts. And then I sent them to Addie, who plays woodwinds and saxophone. She sings some background vocals. And she truly kind of created and wrote these expansive parts that are on, I think, 3 or 4 of the different songs. And that kind of shaped the sound in a way I wasn't really anticipating. I kind of just said, like, here, you should take these, and just like wrote these beautiful parts. So sonically, it just kind of, it was very organic, and it kind of just became what it wanted to become. And I mean, I guess it's not totally fair to say, because I'm sure if I didn't like something, I would have said, like, no, let's not do this. But I think that's the beauty of working with collaborators who, before the songs got sent out, I just want to play. Who do I trust to write parts? Who are the people that are going to take these songs and make them become the fullness of what they are? And so that's kind of how the shape of the sounds really came about. And Justin Muffet, the engineer on the record, we would sit and kind of talk about what types of sounds we wanted, like how close to put the mic, if we wanted a room mic, if we wanted it to be super intimate or super far away. So we got really micro on the engineering aspect. Also, we spent probably 2 or 3 months just talking about how we wanted to record it before we started. So it was both intentional, but also like just happened kind of in its own almost like magical kind of way, which feels kind of funny to say, but it worked.
I mean, it sounds magical. That came from somewhere. I really love the instrumentation and the journey that we go on in the opening track, All the Questions I Have Right Now. It says on the one sheet that we go on a sonic journey from chaos to calm across the duration of the record. And I think that what happens in that opening track, once the vocals end, is a significant part of this journey. The final of the questions that I have right now is, how will it feel when your lips, they touch my fruit? And then from that moment, sonically, we go on such a rich journey. Could you give an account of what happens at that moment? On the one hand, how did that magic happen in terms of the production decisions? On the other hand, what is the significance thematically in terms of this journey involving chaos and calm? Everything that's happening once the vocals stop on that opening track.
Yeah, so that was one of my favorite ones to record. Justin and I kind of joked when we were tracking that cacophony of sounds. There's some video footage of me in the studio with like a pile of auxiliary percussion instruments, and I'm just like throwing them around the room and like digging through them. We have room mics up all around. And the joke was, I think this was your pet sounds. And I was like, well, I guess if that's what's going on, I'll take it, because that's a great record. But so this song, All the Questions I Have Right Now, this is the first song I wrote for the album, and I wrote it a couple months ahead of the other songs. This one song was written very specifically about coming to terms with how it felt to go into isolation, how it felt to step away from being near people. So as I was writing that song, it was literally just all the questions that were coming through my mind about this odd time that we were in. And it felt very anxiety ridden. And so as I got to the end of the question, I just started playing this almost like Spanish style guitar strumming thing, kind of out of time. And I felt very confused. I was like, what am I doing? I've never written anything like this. This is not something I've ever tried to do. But I just had this idea to I wanted to just create this wall of sound. After all, the song is in a waltz, and it's very to and fro, and kind of you're just living within the dream of that time, and then it hits this wall of sound that really I think is meant to be representational of the internal chaos that I was feeling, and in that moment, just kind of the anxiety of living in a strange time and not really knowing what to do with that. So that's kind of where that came from. And then, at the end of it, it kind of lilts back into the waltz. You can't, well, at least I can't live in that chaos all the time. So, so that's kind of where that came from. And in terms of capturing it sonically, I remember when I was talking to my engineer, Justin, about this, I knew I wanted accordion on this. And I think he was worried it was going to feel too waltzy, too polka-y. And I was like, no, I think we need to lay into that a little bit. And so when we went to go track it, Lars, he plays drums and he also plays accordion. So he tracked those parts, and we kind of had to work through how to get the drums to feel right, and how to let it all be crazy within the construct of time. So we did just really focus on getting good sounds, but more than sounds, it was about the performance and making sure that parts that we were recording were going to display that feeling of chaos that I wanted to portray. And we got there because I got to play with really excellent people. So it was really fun producing this record, and that's one example of producing, is getting to draw out these performances from the different collaborators. Something I've never done before, and it just felt really good to do.
Absolutely. There is, of course, the paradox that this sense of isolation and yearning for connection there's a universality to that at present. And the way in which all of these features are working together, how the instrumentation kind of picks up on that universality and both augments and complicates the isolated voice. Also the use of, I'm glad you highlighted this already, the waltz form. The fact that that's obviously a form that's associated with dance and with partnership. And yet here we have the absence of a partner and the focus on being alone.
It's interesting. A friend of mine who's a videographer, we've talked on and off about making a video for this song, and maybe we will. And the thing I picture doing is actually having somebody walking in different locations alone. So it's kind of this idea of like you said, a waltz is usually a dance you do with a partner. But the song is really just about that isolation and that aloneness. So it's, I guess, meant to be a juxtaposition. I like writing, but maybe don't actually, like, lyrically aren't like happy. I think it's a fun way to kind of flip the script or twist the narrative or make us think about things in a different way, in almost a dichotomous kind of way.
In our interview on Dream Life, you stated that you had been learning that happiness is a feeling as much as sadness. Your reflection at the time was that, you know, happiness is a state, happiness and sadness kind of come together as a pairing, and you focused on trying to achieve equilibrium and peace. Now that strikes me as very interesting because the word peace and the word bliss are prominent on this new record. So do you have any new reflections on the pursuit of happiness related to seeking, on the one hand, happiness, on the other hand, equilibrium?
Yeah, that's a really astute observation. And I'm happy you brought that up because this record feels like an extension of those ideas and more of a focus on getting to a place of acceptance. Um, and I've been thinking about foreboding joy a lot and how that kind of plays into our sense of happiness and our sense of attachment to people, to things we love, to those we have. Foreboding joy, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's, I think the phrase has been coined by Brene Brown. She talks about foreboding joy as this idea of when you finally find that thing that brings you joy, you skip past the joy and you go to the fear of losing the thing.
Mm.
And the potential sadness of losing the thing that brings you joy. And that's that's always been a super prominent thing in my life. And I didn't really know it was a thing until I read it specifically. And so as I was kind of going through the writing process of this album, you know, a lot of life has changed since Dream Life. You know, when I was writing that album, I was married and then going through a divorce. And then after that album came out, I dated somebody who passed away who died from cancer. And that was a very shock to the system. And as I was finally coming around to writing, and so I wrote 3 songs around that time. So that was kind of a picture of that point in life of, you know, the joy and then the loss and pairing them together. And Let It Stay is really meant to be a look at coming to terms with the reality of loss and the reality of joy and finding that hopefulness and that desire to be at rest and to be at peace and to be lovingly unattached to the things that bring me joy and learning to not maybe give in to the fear. I think that this album definitely is meant to look at coming to terms with being, I wouldn't say unattached to the things of this world, but choosing to hold things loosely and enjoy the things that I do get to experience. And I think it's prominent throughout a lot of the songs on the record.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think that the fact that it's called Let It Stay is all the more beautiful, therefore. We could imagine a situation where someone is graspingly wanting something to stay. And we could contrast that situation with that of someone who is undergoing the pursuit of just the happy state. But here, there's neither the quest for the unachieved state, nor is there a grasping but there is an awareness of whatever it is that one is inviting to stay. It's such an interesting title. Could you reflect a little bit more on how you came upon that title? It works so well.
Yeah, Let It Stay is a direct line out of the last song on the record called Sunset Vignette. I toyed with the idea of calling Sunset Vignette, just titling it Let It Stay, but it just didn't feel like a title to me. And I guess at the end of the day, I felt like it was meant to be the name of the record. And I think that when you think about it, you know, these songs, they were sequenced very specifically. They're kind of put in order to tell a bit of a story. And so when you said Vignette, it's this song about kind of like, it's almost like a partner to the song Seasons, in the fact that it's about the passing of time and the pleading with time, to just let those good things stay. But I think there's also a little bit of melancholy there that's saying like, but it probably won't. Like it will, but like inevitably, you know, we run it with everyone and with everything, whether it be the end of a relationship or the death of a partner or something that gets in the way. So that song and the title specifically, I think, is meant for me to be a meditation on holding on loosely to the things that I have in my life that I'm very lucky to have around.
Yeah. To me, it seems like there is this felt visceral awareness that there's a package of emotions, and one is with full awareness inviting that full package to stay. So it's almost as if, okay, there's this equilibrium. I know that this emotional equilibrium involves sorrow, involves the foreboding, and still I choose it because that's what being fully human is to me, perhaps. Is something on that level happening, do you think? And if so, what role is music playing in the recognition of what it is to be human?
I think you're right. I think you're really right on point with that. It's not an overly complicated notion, but it's something that feels very relevant to my life. Is after leaving my faith, I've had to kind of reconstruct how to find meaning. And part of that is some level of humanism, I suppose. And I think there's maybe some, you know, I've done a lot of different religious studies. I have, you know, studied Christianity and Judaism and Islam and Hinduism and Buddhism, and I mean, not in depth by any stretch, but all of those things have been interesting to me. And I think a piece of that awareness and attachment part of Buddhism has become kind of part of the way I think about the world and how to be present to feelings and also not let them rule me or run me. And so this, in some ways, this album feels like a reflection on coming to terms with that and that process. I think that this expression, this musical expression, is a way to bring those ideas to others as a thought experiment. And there's just a shared humanness in music, you know, like the root of music is meant to tell us stories about the people that we're living with or the communities that we're in or the things that we're going through. So I guess I'm always just trying to honor that kind of history of like of the musical experience in humanity, and this feels like an extension of that in some ways.
we both have a philosophical background, and I feel that it's philosophically and existentially very significant. The way in which music can be used to give expression to this awareness of what it is to be human.
To me, music feels incredibly primal. It's, you know, a lot of people maybe think, there are some people in the world that maybe think the arts aren't relevant or necessary to help us live life, but I just feel very different about that. I feel like if I don't have a way of expressing these feelings and thoughts out of the mind, it puts you into the body. Oh my, what's the point? Like, if all we're doing is this cognitive thing up here instead of like moving into the body, I'm not interested in that life. And I think music, and whether you're listening to music, because it does something to us as we're listening to it, or you're playing music, or you're singing a song, like it's just a deeply expressive experience. And you know, I think that's part of maybe I have a hard time explaining, you know, the meanings behind the thing, because I always say I kind of just follow the thread or pull the thread and let the instinct take over. And I think that's a big part of it for me, is because it's very instinctual, and it's almost like when I'm writing, it's like this music is begging to come out.
I'm completely on board with you and with what you're saying about the significance of the emotions and embodiment. We began talking about this back in our previous interview. I brought up Spinoza, who as an academic, my published scholarship is on Spinoza. And at the time you said, I can definitely get down with Spinoza, and I'm very anti-Descartes. So you were right there with me at the time. So obviously these emotions are not unreasoning. Well, yes, they are related to the body, but we need to think outside of this Cartesian reasonable mind versus unreasonable body dichotomy, which is why I think it's so significant that we have the waltz evoking dancing, and that's kind of evoking the body as well. There is a knowing that happens. We could think about heart knowledge. We could think about how the body keeps the score through, say, Bessel van der Kolk. And I feel that until we really grapple with that truth, then we're at risk of not honoring what music is and what music can do and what music does for us.
I would agree. There is a book that I read over the past maybe year and a half. It's by a philosopher. Her name is Mirabai Starr. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She teaches out of the University of New Mexico, Taos. She really focuses on philosophy and kind of like world religions, theology, and kind of marries a lot of different thinkers together. And so I read a book by her last year called Wild Mercy. She focuses on like 7 or 8 different female mystics of various different traditions. She's kind of thinking about male versus female as conceptual ideas, and how male embodiment and patriarchy looks a certain way, and often it is associated with rationality, being reasonable, the reasonable mind. It's philosophically about, like, from a religious perspective, about getting out of the body and going to this other place. And she juxtaposes it at all of these women mystics who do the opposite, and it happens across all of these religious traditions. Instead of going out there, they're about being in here, and it's about being embodied, and how you can be in your mind, but that's also, and you can have this cognition, but it's also a part of this greater holistic system. And so I think that when we think about music as this primal experience, it's kind of a both and. It's not an either or. And she does a great job of saying in her book, like, we don't have to only have this female embodiment or male embodiment of how we think about mysticism. It can be both, and both are important and necessary. And there's also all of these in betweens. And she even goes further to say that you can be in a male body and have a female spirit, you know, and I think that's just, it's very accurate, especially how we think about gender and gender fluidity and all of that stuff. So all that to say, I loved how she helped me kind of go and think about what I do as a person in the world, as a somebody who identifies as female in a female appearing body, who is a musician. It feels good to me to be grounded in the body, in the both and having this cognition piece is necessary. The primal thing happen, but you kind of just need, I just think you need both of them. And yeah, at the end of the day, music does feel extremely primal, because while we may not, you know, people may say we may not need it, I think we all do need some form of expression that helps us go beyond the happiness, go beyond the joy, go beyond the grief, because we can think it, but thinking it doesn't help you really move through it or feel it. And sometimes a song or a voice just can transport you to I guess moving through those feelings.
First of all, her translation of The Dark Night of the Soul is amazing and has had a massive impact on me. Secondly, and the female mystics you're referring to, I mean, I have the Interior Castle on my bookshelf just here, for example. More so than Spinoza, I resonate much more with these female mystics that you're referring to, and also to the professor that you quoted last time. People are not the problem, they are the point. Yeah, I just think that this is so significant. In our previous discussion in Dream State, in Dream Life, that began with a song about war and the war context, and we were talking briefly about, in our culture, argument is war. The metaphor of argument is war. I made a reference to metaphors we live by, and we're about to finish now, but the alternative to conceiving argument as like a war, which is the default in our culture, we're invited in this book to imagine a culture where an argument is viewed as a dance. The participants are seen as performers, and the goal is to perform in a balanced and aesthetically pleasing way. And for me, with this record beginning with a waltz, in the way that we were recognizing and celebrating the way in which we're playing with rhythm, the tempo changes in that opening song, the dance metaphor and attunement, you know, there's so much more that we could talk about. And actually, seriously, if you would like to return, having read Nonviolent Communication, if you as you intend to, I think we could have such an interesting philosophical conversation about your music through the lens of these different frameworks.
I would love to chat more about any of that. You know, my favorite thing to do is to talk about ideas. It's very life-giving to me to go out into the world and experience the world and come up against ideas and frameworks and do some reading and do some listening and watching. And I'm just a learner by nature, and so I would love to read that and chat about it, because it's just inevitable that what I am taking in, my external inputs, are going to inform what comes out from an artistic perspective. It's it's inevitable. And that's part of, you know, we live in a culture that's, you know, very Instagram, get your content out, and it needs to be branded, it needs to be this way. And I'm like, I'm a whole person. I need to experience the world. I need to go be with people and go be alone and all the things in between before I can like write another album. And so I just love the idea of taking in more knowledge, and it's all songwriting to me. It's, you know, all of that experience is writing a song. It's just in the early infant stages of writing. So it would be fun to do some reading and talk about that in the context of art and creating art. So count me in.
Because we should highlight, both of us do have philosophical backgrounds. So I just really love the idea of, I for one have shifted away from philosophy and towards when I was in Minneapolis, the Minneapolis music scene, because of my sense of life, because of honoring and celebrating what music does, and to be able to recruit the philosophical perspective to make sense of and honor what music is doing, especially in a magical record such as this, is what I'm all about now. So I look forward to having you back, hopefully in the second season of this new era, Back to the City. Thank you very much for the discussion today. And yeah, I can't wait for part 2.
Awesome. Well, thank you as always for having me. It's always really fun to chat with you. You are one of the best interviewers out there, and I just appreciate catching up. So we'll talk again soon.